Have you heard about measles wiping out your immune system? Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Dr. Brittany Todd. I'm a pharmacist. First and foremost, let's talk about the cases of measles in 2026. Everyone's been hearing in the news that there are significantly more cases of measles this year, probably because people aren't vaccinating, is what we're being told. Well, so far in 2026, there's been about 2,000 cases of confirmed measles. And in 2025, there were about 2,200 in the entire year. So we are on track to almost double the measles cases from last year. What's interesting, though, is we're blaming the anti-vaxxers, the people who are not vaccinating their kids, but the majority of cases are those who are 5 years and over, which means that they probably got their 1-year vaccine, the MMR, which is 93% effective, even if they only got the 1 dose, but they probably got 2 when they were 1 year old, which means that the vaccine should still be working in our 5 to 19-year-olds. It's not the littles that are getting measles, it's the in-between 5 to 19-year-olds that are getting measles. And their vaccination rates are above 95%. Good news is those that are getting measles this year are not as severe. There are fewer hospitalizations and there have been 0 deaths. But let's talk about other complications of measles, not just getting measles, but is there anything else we have to worry about? And there's something called immune amnesia, which is unique to the measles infection, not the measles vaccine. And what they found in 2 different kinds of studies is there is a reduction in immune response or antibody response of other diseases that people were previously exposed to if they get the measles virus. And the reason for that is studies have shown that the measles virus itself attacks the memory B and T cells in your immune system. And those are necessary to identify bacteria and viruses that children have had in the past so that they fight it off in the future. And what happens is the measles virus actually infects those B and T cells and kills them. And it basically wipes out the immune system. So 2 types of studies had to take place that would help us understand and recognize the risk of measles virus-induced immune amnesia. The first one was epidemiological studies, looking at people who had measles and their infection rates after. And there are several studies looking at about 2,200 kiddos, and they found that kiddos who were exposed to the measles virus and had measles had higher rates of other infections, things like adenovirus, which usually causes the common cold, RSV, flu, pneumonia, compared to those who didn't have measles virus. Now, the limitation of epidemiological studies is correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because we saw those who had measles had higher rates of these illnesses doesn't mean that the measles virus caused it, but it's a pretty sure indicator. What's really interesting is this immune amnesia actually can last up to 5 years after measles. It basically wipes out the antibodies and acts like the body's never seen these diseases before, and it's like a relearning process. But like I said, correlation doesn't equal causation, so they did another type of study. They actually looked at antibody levels in children who were exposed to measles. Now, they didn't expose them to measles, but when they found an outbreak in the Netherlands, they went to those parents and said, can we test the antibody levels of your children? And they found a significant reduction in antibodies for several different infectious diseases. On average, they found that about 40% of children's antibodies were just wiped out for things like adenovirus, RSV, pneumonia. Some kiddos had about 73% of their antibodies wiped out. Now, they did another study in primates where they actually did expose them to measles, and they found about a 40 to 60% reduction in other antibodies for other infectious diseases. So there's a mechanism, and they can actually study it and see the antibody reductions. And then there's the epidemiological data that shows that kiddos who had the measles were sicker over the next 5 years. No other infectious disease has shown this phenomenon. COVID, flu, those can cause immunosuppression around the time of the disease, but it doesn't last for years. And there is historical context with this, believe it or not. In the 1800s, one physician noticed that the kiddos who had measles had worsening tuberculosis and even died from tuberculosis, not from the measles. They also noted that kiddos were more susceptible to dysentery, severe diarrhea, and other respiratory infections, even before they understood antibodies and vaccines. Now, there's a statistic that sounds very scary that says that up to 50% of kiddos who died from measles actually didn't die from measles, but they died from the subsequent diseases that they developed after measles. Now, the statistic comes from actually the 1910s to 1940s range, before antibiotics, vaccines, sanitation, food and water quality, sewer regulation, and there was a 90% decline in measles deaths before the vaccine ever hit the market. One thing I want to note is that all of the information that we have about immune amnesia comes from just a few studies. Only one human study looking at antibody levels, a primate study looking at antibody levels, and then 2 epidemiological studies. The antibody level study done in kids was only 77 children. Very small. Despite an increased risk of these other infections, these kiddos actually did not have an increased risk of hospitalization or mortality. Again, this is all so you can decide risk-benefit. What's the risk of the disease? What's the benefit of the vaccine? And then what's the risk of the vaccine? And which risk are you willing to take?